I would rather die on the highways of Alabama than make a butchery of my conscience. Yes, sir.
Question. If you were around during the Civil Rights Movement, would you have supported Martin Luther King Jr., our most celebrated leader of the time?
Well, I would hope so, but it was a vastly different world back then, so who knows what I would have thought. But thankfully, I grew up in a world where the ideals so famously professed by King, passive resistance, nonviolence, assessing people on the basis of their character and not their color, was all part of my value system from the get-go. But, why do you ask?
The answer probably seems obvious, but there's a really good chance that you wouldn't have approved of him. And that's because our commonly held ideas about Dr. King are watered down, overly romanticized, and often flat out wrong.
I have a dream. One day.
Well, I'll grant you that. Many people we revere now, from the near or distant past, are not nearly as objectively rosy as legends may hold. But I don't care. I hold sacred the principles that King so famously advocated for. I do not deify the man, but neither do I have any real cause to denigrate him either. But, all right, tell me why I should not respect Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
We often think that most good people loved Martin Luther King when he was alive, and sadly, that wasn't the case, right?
Right.
Many, many people certainly admired him, but the vast majority of Americans were not.
Well, though you provide no evidence, I will stipulate that the American people at that time were, in various portions, either for, against, or indifferent to Dr. King. Just like every other issue or public figure ever to cross the threshold of the American public consciousness. So, what's your point? The opinions of the past should diminish how we view Dr. King now? I must be missing something.
One of the things that we've also missed is the ways that Dr. King is talking about police brutality when he's alive.
Something must be done to end this kind of unnecessary abuse of police power and what we see as outright police brutality.
In the speech that you are sampling there, Dr. King was responding to a question specifically about the South. Are you meaning to say that the way the police operate in the South today is comparable with how they behaved in the 1960s?
We've often heard critics of Black Lives Matter say if Dr. King were alive today, he'd be ashamed.
But all lives matter. It's not that any life matters more than another. That's the whole message I think that Dr. King tried to present.
Mike Huckabee instructs the protesters in Ferguson to be more like Martin Luther King. I thought to myself, be careful what you wish for.
Be careful what you wish for? Okay, now, I'm no real fan of Mike Huckabee on a raft of issues. But if he was pleading for the protesters in Ferguson to be more like Dr. King, I can only assume he meant to behave peacefully. You know, the passive resistance that exemplified King's teachings and his demonstrations. So, why would that be a careful what you wish for moment?
Because in many ways, the Ferguson protesters were a lot like Martin Luther King.
Oh, they were? The Ferguson protesters were a lot like Dr. King. All right, I am ready to be educated. How was a violent mob like Dr. Martin Luther King.
Dr. King very much understood the importance and need for sort of the disrupting of unjust conditions. He was arrested 30 times over the course of his life.
Yes. And what was Dr. King arrested for? Disobeying a police order, loitering, traffic violations, tax violations, of which he was acquitted. Well, golly, I'm not seeing anything about looting or arson or destruction of property. All of those things perpetrated by the Ferguson protesters. And Dr. King, though in the majority of cases arrested unjustly, did serve his time and appealed his cases peacefully. Just like the Ferguson protesters, of course.
Of course!
Who were all unjustly maligned and who all served jail time despite being innocent. Oh, wait, that didn't happen, did it? So, yeah, you're absolutely right. There is no difference between how Dr. King behaved and how the Ferguson rioters, I mean protesters, behaved.
We're the home of Dr. Martin Luther King. And the only thing that I ask is that they not take the freeways. Dr. King would never take a freeway. Dr. King would never take a freeway.
It was just astonishing. The Selma to Montgomery March, that's on a highway.
Okay, I cannot argue with you on that one. That was a patently stupid statement that official made. But that aside, how Dr. Martin Luther King took a freeway is exactly how Black Lives Matter has taken a freeway.
Dr. King, how are things shaping up now for tomorrow?
Things are shaping up beautifully. We have people coming in from all over the country. I suspect that we will have representatives from almost every state in the Union and naturally a large number of people from the state of Alabama. And we hope to see, and we plan to see, the greatest witness for freedom ever taken place, that has ever taken place on the steps of the capital of any state in the South.
Pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon. Pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon. Pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon.
Golly, did I just watch two clips from two different events? Because they are so exactly the same.
Certainly, Dr. King saw segregation in the South as a problem, but he also saw segregation in the North as a problem.
The many problems that exist here and in all of our urban and rural communities for that matter.
What? Dr. King thought segregation in the North was also a problem? Well, golly, it's a wonder he only focused on the South and didn't work to, push for federal civil rights laws or something.
In the letter from Birmingham jail in 1963, he's talking about the greatest threat may not be the Klan, but the white moderate who prefers order to justice.
Glaring example.
Well, okay, I will grant you that. At that time, King thought that. And he may have been correct. But a majority white Congress and a white president voted for and signed into law the Civil Rights Act of 1964, as well as several subsequent pieces of legislation that built upon that framework. And so, this has what to do with Black Lives Matter today? And this all says what about why we shouldn't still respect Dr. Martin Luther King?
The fear and resistance to Dr. King ran deep, well into the offices of elected leaders and the FBI.
They're bugging and wiretapping his home, his office, his hotel rooms. They see him as potentially dangerous, potentially a communist or a communist sympathizer.
What is your reaction to the charges made by J. Edgar Hoover? He called you the most notorious liar in the country, and this is a direct quote.
Yes, this is what I understand.
Yes, Dr. Martin Luther King was vilified and derided unjustly by the government. He was a true victim of targeted governmental injustice. And this works against seeing him as a principled hero because...
So if in fact Dr. King was angry, criticized white moderates and liberals, advocated for criminal justice reform, and believed in civil disobedience, why is it that we have this overly warm and fuzzy idea of him?
Because the principles he advocated for and practiced were peaceful, and the world he wanted to see was one of unity, absent of racial discrimination. And he actually practiced what he preached in the face of overwhelming opposition, and his efforts changed history. That is why he is thought of so highly. But we're not supposed to think highly of him because... what was this video about again?
Our commonly held ideas about Dr. King are watered down, overly romanticized, and often flat out wrong.
Uh-huh. So, when do we get to that part?
And what purpose does that narrative serve?
What purpose does it serve? Holding up lofty ideals for a better society by pointing to someone who stuck by their principles for equality and liberty and actually succeeded without violence or hatred, and who was assassinated as a result of his efforts. Golly, I don't know. Why do we celebrate that kind of thing in a civilized society? I have no idea.
Honoring Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement is used to make us feel good about ourselves as a country. We had a problem, they shone a light on this injustice, and we corrected it. Even when President Trump goes to meet the Pope, takes him first edition writings of Dr. King.
So I wonder, how will history remember people like Colin Kaepernick and the activists of Black Lives Matter?
I couldn't see another hashtag Sandra Bland, hashtag Tamir Rice.
Colin Kaepernick. You set Colin Kaepernick, a mediocre football player who turned a tantrum over a contract negotiation into a racial crusade, alongside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a wealthy athlete who has been all but deified by the press and the left in this country, and who has faced zero governmental retaliation for his actions or views. Yes, Colin Kaepernick is right up there with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Got it.
I think we will see a Colin Kaepernick Boulevard.
A Colin Kaepernick Boulevard. Oh, could we please see that one day? And what a fine day that will be.
Similar with Black Lives Matter. I mean, Black Lives Matter has fundamentally changed the national conversation we're having. So there's no question to me. In 20 years, we're going to look back on this as necessary, as essential, as important, as right.
As right. Black Lives Matter is right. Calling white people genetically inferior is right. Burning down cities and rioting is right. Calling for the deaths of police officers is right. Causing the deaths of police officers is right. This video challenges us to look back at Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and question whether our rosy assessment of him is justified, by highlighting the very reasons why King is justifiably respected. But 20 years from now, Colin Kaepernick and Black Lives Matter will be seen as right. Yes, and God forbid anyone research the truth of such claims and say anything that takes the bloom off those rosy decrees. Because that, well, that would be racist. As always, thank you for watching.